Wanted to start by asking you about the most recent research that you and your colleagues have been doing.
We were approached by the Engelhardt Foundation, who asked us, they were studying college students. And college students, they've been finding that college students have had, there's a lot of depression, anxiety, and increasing rates of depression and anxiety, as well as substance use among college students who feel very burnt out, partly because of they've had such stressful high school academic careers. And so the Engelhardt Foundation asked us if we could look at youth in high school, particularly those who are in affluent and private schools. A colleague, I am also an adjunct at Teachers College, Columbia University, and a former colleague of mine there, Sunia Luther, she had done a lot of work looking at affluent youth and the challenges that they're facing in public suburban schools. So we looked at youth who are in private schools who have not really received much attention at all.
So tell me how you and your colleague went about measuring the stress levels.
So this was what we call a mixed method study, which means that we did both quantitative, like surveys, and we also did qualitative, where you talk to, you ask questions, and it's very open-ended, and you record and transcribe what the participants say, and then you analyze the whole group of them. And then what we do is we combined the survey data and the qualitative data to try to understand this phenomenon of stress, academic stress, and how youth are coping in both positive and negative ways.
What kind of questions did you ask when you had those open-ended questions?
So how's life here at this school? Some of them very general. And then we start talking about that. Then we ask, so do you feel, that you're under a lot of stress? And could you define stress for me? Because everyone defines stress a little differently. And stress, of course, is subjective, right? Because stress is about how your ability to face what's happening in the environment. And everyone has different ways of dealing with that for very different stressors, and importantly, within different environments. And that's a key piece of this research.
What did you find?
We found that there were many youth who were coping very well with this stress. They felt that they were under stress. They didn't think that it was necessarily appropriate. And given the levels of stress that they reported, it doesn't seem very developmentally appropriate for these youth. Because in a way, they're coping with challenges that adults, they're juggling so many things, and they feel stressed most of the time. But there's a minority, but a very significant minority of youth who were coping in very negative ways. And those negative ways were particularly using alcohol and marijuana in ways that they were using them to deal with their feelings. So we know it's very normative that many adolescents have some alcohol, try some marijuana, but when marijuana and alcohol in teenagers is used to cope with stress or depression or other negative emotions, that is very predictive often of problems with substances later on in life.
Why our kids are so stressed?
In our study of the youth in the private schools, overwhelmingly the stress was academic, homework, and preparing for college and getting into a good college. Those were the three top that persisted, those stressors.
Was there a number one? Was it, will I get into college?
For these youth, no. They knew they were going to get into college because they were very affluent. They were in very high achieving schools. It wasn't that they weren't going to get into college. It was which college. And getting into an Ivy League college or one of the top 10 colleges in the country was really, really important. We did a lot of interviews, not only with students, but we did interviews with teachers, administrators, as well as an expert panel of counselors and teachers who commented on the findings, so we could get some other opinions about our findings. And this quote did not make it into the paper, but one of the teachers that we interviewed, she said, she says to the students, when I first came to this school, I thought there were hundreds of colleges in the United States, thousands. And then I came here and I realized there's 5. There's 5. Because it was these 5, top Ivy League schools that were like, those were the schools that they felt that they had to get into. So that creates an enormous amount of stress because the competition to get into those schools is very, very, very hard. It's very hard.
What other factors are at play here? What other things are they dealing with?
They are dealing with a tremendous amount of stress. The American Psychological Association did a national survey several years ago on stress among adolescents versus adults. And what they found is that adolescents reported more stressors than adults. And this was a national survey. One of the striking things that we found with the youth who were coping negatively around using alcohol and marijuana in particular was that because they felt as if they were taking on adult responsibilities, they deserved to cope like adults, which means, having a substance after, on Saturday night, and that was their, as one youth said, it's our reward for working hard.
What about the positive coping mechanisms?
Some students are handling it well, and they're handling it, I would say primarily at the individual level, and many with the family level. So students who were coping well had parents who were very supportive of their choices, who were very supportive, who didn't give them a hard time if they got a grade that was not less than stellar. But they had a lot to do. So they did a lot. They did things like exercise. There was a lot of meditation and yoga. The school sponsored those kinds of things. Friends were reported as something that really helped them with their stress, as well as, to a lesser extent, however, though, counselors, teachers they didn't report that they were as helpful with their stress, even in these very small, very expensive schools. Some of them, their family. But others sort of like where they had to like take it on themselves. And when I said earlier about stressors and the environment, so the environment has to support youth, right? Whatever environment they're in. So youth who are in this very pressure cooker environment to succeed and to do well and to get into a top college, it's not just their responsibility as 16 and 17-year-olds to help themselves deal with the stress. It's up to parents, schools, the larger community to say, wait a minute, let's evaluate what's happening here. Certainly we want to give youth tools to cope, right? That's part of what we do when we're raising them properly, is giving them tools to deal with stress. And there is, of course, a inverted U with respect to stress. So meaning that stress can be a very good thing because your performance, with a certain amount of stress, your performance increases. It helps you seek out novelty. It helps you discover new things. But when it gets to be too much, then coping and academic performance and lots of other things fall by the wayside. So finding that balance is very tricky. It's certainly very tricky. But when you have students who are reporting an enormous amount of stress, it's up to families, schools, and the communities we found who need to sort of take a step back and say, okay, how can our youth develop and have good developmental trajectories and be proud of themselves and work hard and learn a lot and learn how to achieve, but at the same time are not are not being hampered in their development.
Let's start with what can parents do. But for some parents who maybe don't realize the kind of stress their kids are under, first of all, how do you recognize it? And second of all, what are some tips for them to do?
We heard from students, from families, and as well as other researchers have found many of these things. So one thing is striking a balance, right, in life. That definitely is one. So there's a balance between academics and athletics and things that you have to do, and just having time to just, hang around and not have necessarily responsibility. I think also for kids who are high achievers, like the kids we studied, they will get into a good college, and they will find a college that's a good fit for them. That the top colleges are not necessarily the best fit, right? For your personality, for your habits, for the things you want to study. So it really is a good fit, is what you're kind of looking for.
Instead of the pressure to get into that top 5, top 10, parents should remind their children, again, what kind of advice when it comes to college?
That you want to find a college that is a good fit for your child, obviously for your budget, as well as for the things that they want to study, and in terms of the size and the living arrangements, and all taking into consideration the type of learner they are. Do they need small classes? Do they like large classes? Just all of those things really count in students' abilities to succeed in college.
Any other tips? What else would you recommend to parents?
That it's really important to not place all your eggs in academic and achievement in school, right? That your children are much more than that, and that thinking about how they are as people in the community, people in our society, and how they operate in that is very important to really have those pro-social aspects of themselves, to be a good brother or sister, to be a good friend, to be a good member of your community. Those are extremely important.
You had mentioned exercise. If kids are not already doing that?
Yeah. So exercise, certainly, so we know that physical exercise is really important for keeping you healthy, both your body as well as your mind, and as well as exercising your mind is really important. And more recently, we know about a lot more about exercising your mind than we used to. And one of the ways that exercising your mind is things like meditation, is taking things in a very calm and measured way, and really being able to approach situations with a curious sense, as opposed to having to charge into everything. That's really important. The other thing that we found is that many parents, when children and adolescents do need help because they're not coping well, is seeking out mental health care. And we found that many parents were very reluctant, scared. And one of the things we found is that parents were nervous that this seeking out mental health treatment was going to go on their child's record and would diminish their chances to get into a good college.
Can you allay some of those fears? Does that hurt or impact a child's
Absolutely,
chances?
yeah, it does not. Absolutely not. First of all, mental health treatment is strictly confidential. And if parents do not feel that they can go to their school because of fears, they certainly can call their local hospital, look up their local community mental health center, ask their pediatrician or their primary care doctor, ask them for a referral to a mental health professional for their child or their family, whatever seems to be the most appropriate. And it's all confidential.
I wanted to ask you what the implications are for this study.
Well, the implications are that there's most of the students are under a tremendous amount of stress. So that is one of the implications. And that just echoes what national surveys have found, and it seems to be particularly acute among high-achieving students. But also, there are students who are not coping in ways that are healthy for their development. And it is really important that students are able to get help, to be able to ask for help, but importantly for school personnel, particularly where parents may not be able to understand it, for school personnel to be on the lookout for students, to understand, whoa, there's an enormous amount of pressure now. It's junior year, they're applying to colleges. What are we doing as a school and a community to identify those youth who are really not coping well, even though it may be hard to see?
Are the students 9 through 12 that you studied, or do you find that most of the stressors are your upper grades, your 11 and 12?
So what the students, we studied 11th graders, and what the students told us that it just gets stressful every year, and that by junior year it was kind of the pinnacle of their stress.
Why is it junior year where it all seems to come to critical mass?
Because that's when students are starting to well, first of all, their grades in junior year are really looked at closely by college admissions offices. But they also have to start making decisions, they have to start writing their essays, they have to start thinking about, and they also have to start taking the SATs or the ACTs and preparing, studying for those and preparing. So between their regular schoolwork, preparing for these tests, knowing that their grades are really going to be looked at, as well as just all the other things, makes it a very particularly stressful year.
What kind of message for policymakers and for school leaders and those who work in education, what can they take from this research?
Students have a lot of academic stress. In our study, there was a lot of stress. But students who are in other circumstances, who have stressors that are not typical, so they live in high poverty neighborhoods, there's trauma in the family, they don't know, there's food scarcity in their family, there's homelessness, so all of these things produce a lot of stress for students. So those students, and students who really are going to are on an academic track to go to college, they're even under more stress. But I think we have to sort of take a step back, and when you think about stress and our children, we have to sort of think about our responsibility as adults and how are we balancing in the community for all students, right? So we have this system where there's some students who are just under tremendous stress academically, and there's other students who are under tremendous stress from a lot of adverse childhood experiences as well as academic stress. So we need to really take a look at what are we asking our children to do, and are we just focusing on sort of the cognitive stuff, those standardized tests, and making sure that they get good grades and making sure those tests, or are we preparing them for a way of coping with life stressors as they go on that is outside of learning algebra and learning trigonometry, and right, it's those things that are going to help them in their developmental trajectory, and that's for all students.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you would want to make sure that people know?
I think there's also this sense of, our children are very resilient. And many of them are very resilient. And what our responsibility is to build on that resilience, right? They have stressors, but we have to take what resilience they bring to this world and build it up, right? We have to accentuate the positive and as opposed to just sort of thinking about stamping out the negative, right? You have to balance both of those things. I mean, I think that's really important.
The research is funded by?
It was funded by the Engelhart Foundation.
Could you tell me who they are?
They're a private foundation that they fund a lot of school. They were involved in colleges. They were doing work with colleges as well as school.
From this, could there be intervention when you have studies like this?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, some of the work that we do in terms of intervention has been with more vulnerable youth, and that is doing programs such as mindfulness meditation, as well as using mobile health, using smartphones and other ways. So there's a lot of ways, but really I think the biggest way is for parents and students and teachers and the community to come together and say, you know, what do we need and what do we want and how can we get there in a way that's more balanced?
Area of expertise?
I'm a psychologist, and my work involves children and adolescents and families, both very vulnerable youth and families, as well as those who are in higher socioeconomic brackets.
Just a little bit about your background. Where did you get your undergraduate degrees, master's, doctorate?
My undergraduate degree was from Salve Regina University, which is in Newport, Rhode Island. And my PhD was from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst.